again to What People with Disabilities Teach Us. I'm your host, Mike Delaney. Pamela Mullins is our executive producer, and today we have a very special group of guests. We have the staff from a local church, Florence Christian Church. I'm excited because churches need to become more engaged with disabilities. I'm not saying that churches don't already do so, but this church in particular is getting involved in ways that hasn't been tried before, as well as some conventional ways. And I find that very exciting, since some of what Florence Christian Church is going to do involves the social component that we talked about with this program. But without any hesitation, let me introduce to you Phyllis Reed on my far left, and on my immediate left, Susan Diamond is the senior minister, and on my right is Diana Hodges-Batzka. Batzka.
Almost.
It comes off so well when you all look better than I do, and people say, "Good, you put him where he belongs." I'm going to let each one of them say a few things about themselves. Phyllis, if you would start and tell us a few things about you and your role at Florence Christian.
Sure. I am the Health Ministries Coordinator. Health Ministries is a real special ministry at Florence Christian, and we have lots of support from our coordinator of faith ministry at St. Elizabeth. Marlene Fagan is someone that we work with that keeps us educated and keeps us on our toes. Some of the things that Health Ministries does at Florence Christian is we do a monthly blood pressure screening. This past Sunday we had flu shots and blood pressure screenings. We write a monthly newsletter lifting up both a physical and a mental focus for the month. And so those are some of the things that we do, and we're trying to build and grow on a monthly basis.
And just to quickly dovetail, Phyllis, you have spent a career in nursing too, so.
Just 46 years.
Okay, that qualifies.
Yeah, and I have been a mental health nurse practitioner for the last 10 years. So, yeah, I've had many roles in healthcare.
How about other roles at Florence Christian? How long have you been there?
Well, we've been there, our family has been there over 40 years, and we've been Sunday school teachers, we've been deacons and elders, and involved in as many ways as possible. That's one of the things that our family loves about Florence Christian, is that there are many opportunities for service.
Super. And since you chimed in, you go next.
Okay. Well, Susan Diamond, and I am, my title is senior minister, but I consider myself a part of this wonderful ministry team that we have, not all of whom are here today, but a great group of people, lay people as well as clergy, who are really dedicated to the church and its ministries and its mission. And I've been there now for about 18 months, 19 months. Time's keeping on going, but we're really excited about being in Northern Kentucky. Served a couple of churches before coming here in Naples, Florida, and in Montgomery, Alabama, and just excited about the ministry that we have here at Florence Christian Church.
Glad to have you in Northern Kentucky.
We're glad to be here.
Diana?
I'm Diana Hodges-Batzka. I serve as associate minister, but Susan and I like to joke that we are a clergy couple. We're just married to different people. So we have worked together before, and we started at Florence a little less than 2 years ago, and it is a wonderful privilege to be a part of this ministry. I work primarily in lots of areas, actually, not primarily, but I oversee children and youth faith formation. I am the pastoral staff liaison for our Discover Zone, which is our child care and preschool weekday program, which has an enrollment of about 160 from infants through our school age program. I also oversee IT and communications, as well as work in worship and administrate all sorts of areas and do wonderful things like this. And it is a wonderful opportunity. I've served in full-time ministry for over 10 years, actually, believe it or not. And I've served congregations in Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, Pennsylvania, and now Kentucky. So I'm glad to be here and to be working with this amazing congregation.
Also, welcome to Northern Kentucky. Great. Well, I want us, all of us, to let our hair down a little bit, step apart from your professional role for a moment and just be one of the folks. I'd like for us to just brainstorm for a few moments when I say disabilities. And feel free to revert to your personal lives, your lifelong lives of people that have come to mind, and now what you think of. When I say disabilities, and we usually use three big categories. I use the category of physical disabilities, cognitive, some people call it intellectual, and as Phyllis has already alluded to, mental health or mental illness. Mm-hmm. When I mention those three categories of disabilities, what comes to mind? What kinds of disabilities?
I think of people that I see regularly that have more physical disabilities that come to our community in wheelchairs. We have several that come that are in either scooters or wheelchairs that cannot be up on their 2 feet. That's one of the areas.
Mm-hmm.
I think of chronic pain as a disability.
Mm-hmm.
I see patients frequently that are disabled by their pain, and it has the thing about any kind of disability, I just have to say this, it is not one-dimensional. It is not physical, it is or intellectual or emotional or mental. It's a combination. And so when you have chronic pain, a lot of times that leads to depression or anxiety. It can lead to lack of concentration, so it impacts everything. Mm-hmm. So chronic pain, but I also think of, particularly because I'm a mental health nurse practitioner now, I think of the emotional and mental kinds of disabilities that people have. Mental illness is not just a matter of just pulling yourself together and changing your mind about something. Depression limits your ability to get yourself out of bed in the morning and do your normal daily activities. So those are some of the things that I think about when you say disability.
I sometimes can't keep from thinking of it as a dinner plate in which your veggies run into your mashed potatoes and the gravy overflows onto something. So too with disabilities, they mix and mingle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you did each of those categories, I actually think of my family and of myself, because I have close family members, including myself, that fall into at least one of those categories. And I remember as a child making fun of my dad, who had dyslexia, who spelled cupcake with 3 Ks on the shopping list, and I remember learning to struggle to read and being tested for dyslexia when I was little. I remember watching my grandfather get older and having to use a cane and him resisting doing that, but we worried for him. I think about my family members who suffer from depression and anxiety. I think about my uncle who has cognitive disabilities and lives in a group home. That's who I think about when you say disabilities. I think about my family.
In fact, from a church point of view and effectively ministering to all the possibilities. It can quickly be daunting.
It can be, but I think one of the things that you mentioned is sometimes churches are under the illusion that, because everybody comes in and they say they're fine, they really are fine, when the truth is that all of us are impacted by disability in some fashion, and I'm glad you brought that up.
No question. I know historically Florence Christian has, gotten a leg up early on and done some things since, and we're here to talk about today and in the future, but share with us
Well,
quickly.
I want to first, and I think this will make sense as we talk about the history of the church. I want to first tell you a little bit about the church's mission statement, because this is something actually that we've developed within the past year as we have looked at the congregation and trying to put words to who we are. And even though it's a year old, I think it really goes back in time to talk about the core values and who the church is and who God calls us to be. But our mission statement is that Florence Christian Church celebrates God's welcome table of abundant love, grace, and acceptance. Those are the things that really kind of drive us as a congregation. And the reason I say it kind of goes back, it goes back and it pulls us forward. It goes back because the church has always, I think, been a community of faith who looked outside of themselves and saw need and addressed that need. And I'm going to give an example that in the 1970s, I believe it was, the church saw the need for seniors to have a place to live, a wholesome and safe and nurturing place to live. And so we congregation built a senior center next to Florence, the church. And then we, after we built the senior center, we realized, hey, there's a group of people that can't get to church because we have steps. They go up into our sanctuary. And so the church thought, how can we be a welcoming place if we can't easily make it accessible? And so we installed handicap access through elevators and ramps and those kinds of things. So, the whole idea of being a welcome place, that God welcomes all people. But if we're going to get to where God is as who we are as a church, then we've got to be listening to those needs and addressing them.
And Florence has done that.
Yes.
You have attracted multiracial folk.
Exactly.
And
that's just
different ethnicities.
exactly.
But you also involve women in leadership positions.
Women in leadership.
Speaking of, duh.
Yeah,
kind of obvious.
Yes, and and it seems like whenever a need presents itself, and I want to say this, it's kind of interesting how I believe God equips the saints for meeting those needs. So we started having, or God started bringing people into the life of the church who had gifts of communicating people with hearing deficiencies. And so people came in and they were able to sign. And so we have that available when people come to the church so that they can feel welcomed and accepted and responded to, so that communication and community can be built up. So the mission statement is one that calls us to God's welcome table, and we disciples like to celebrate communion every week, but the welcome table is not just that communion table. It's about the community of faith that is brought together because of God's grace, love, and acceptance. And so that's what's led us into these ministries. Now I wanted to say, Mike and I had this conversation before. We had this conversation that we're no experts on this. We are taking baby steps as we go forward. But the thing that excites me as I look back at our history is that the church first is the one about reaching out into the community, and then as we learn new needs, we try to make that welcome available. And the great thing about making the welcome available is that we get to benefit from the gifts that are brought to us from these wonderful people who may not have had access any other way, but as we have, valued them, that we're learning and growing.
That sounds exciting to me. I look forward to hearing how you all relate to it emotionally as well as intellectually. We're back with the staff from Florence Christian Church. I wanted to share with everyone a thought and a reflection that I had from Stephanie Hubbock's book. It's called Same Lake, Different Boats, in which she shares a story about her son Tim, who has Down syndrome. And Stephanie says he needs glasses. If you could see close enough on the cover, both of Stephanie's sons have glasses. When Tim got his, he was so excited, not just about being able to see better, but he looked in the mirror and said, "Now I look like a real boy." Stephanie said she remembered the scene in Pinocchio, where Pinocchio so much wanted to be a real boy, and it kind of broke Mom's heart to think of people with disabilities who never really feel quite like people. This show today is about being more real in our faith and as church. For me, I'm partial. I advocate on behalf of people with disabilities, but I can't help but feel that when we do so, we are being closer to what Christians aspire to be. We don't want to just reach out to the Christian community. We hope to embrace people of all faiths. We aspire to certainly be about healing and reaching people that Jesus so often reached out to, and that touches me, and so we want to be more and more real all the time, and that is what we learn about being incarnational. The Word became flesh. God wanted us to be more familiar with Him. Disabilities teach us how to do that. I'd like to go back to Phyllis. One of the beautiful things about what Florence is doing, they are doing some of the conventional work with people with disabilities that has been done, and getting ready to do some of the new stuff too that Diana's going to talk about in a moment. But Phyllis has already shared with you her background. And so she's going to talk about an upcoming training course that's going to be offered at Florence Christian Church. Phyllis, I'll hush and let you talk.
Okay. Well, this is really very exciting. The Boone County Board of Education has a grant, and they did a number of trainings to train people to be able to teach an 8-hour course in youth mental health first aid. Now, who would be interested in that? Plenty of people that work with youth, like teachers and youth leaders and coaches, and anybody that is around kids, including parents. So, youth mental health first aid, I'm very excited about it for a whole lot of reasons, and one of them is that it helps normalize, it helps destigmatize mental illness, because you can't really know how to help or how to identify a youth who might need mental health first aid unless you first know something about mental illness and mental health issues. So there's a good deal of time spent identifying different kinds of mental illnesses like depression and social anxiety disorder and general anxiety disorder and substance abuse. So we teach the participants about that, But in addition, there's also a good bit of time spent on recovery and resiliency. So it's a kind of program that not only gives you tools to help, but it also gives you tools to encourage people who might have a mental illness or an emotional problem, or feel handicapped by the fact that they simply can't go out in a crowd, and that keeps them from participating in life as a youngster. It gives them hope and lets them know that there's always opportunities to get better, and that especially youngsters are able to get better. It's open to any adults. We can take up to 30, so people do need to get their reservations in, and they can do that through the church office. It's held on October the 22nd from 9 a.m. until probably between 4 and 4:30. Depending, because there's always a lot of discussion, and it's a lot of hands-on activities and a lot of videos that demonstrate that resiliency and recovery aspect that I was talking about. And it will be held at our church at 300 Main. Please get in touch with us and learn the tools. The phone number at the church is 859-647-5000. That's 859-647-5000. And we would just love to have anybody from the community come and join us. You don't have to be a member. We'd love to have as many people as possible to share all the information that we have.
Great. And I didn't mean to overemphasize the conventional nature of this. Mental health first aid has been offered, as you described, by different communities in the general population, but I haven't heard of many churches in this area offering it. So that is new to my exposure. And I think that's great that people both at the church but beyond
Yes.
can participate.
Well, I think one of the reasons why this came about was that we have youth within our congregation who are struggling with mental health issues, and caring adults around them, our church community, want to know how to support those youth and how to support their parents. And so we saw this as a really great opportunity.
You both know from your seminary training, the church tends to lag behind socially in what's happening and what's going on. I was just at a funeral home here in the area the other day when one of the members on staff alluded to his boss as having obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. And a few years ago, we wouldn't have heard something like that bannered about in the workplace. I'm not sure it's still part of the church's lexicon or has yet been integrated in. I mean, we still are people who circle around the Bible, and that's good, and teach stories and worship and those kinds of things. But to be integrated into the popular culture as well, for the Word to become flesh and dwell among us, we just have to be in touch with what other people know.
Yes. I think one of the things that's important for people to know about us as Christian Church Disciples of Christ is what our general
Identity statement.
Yeah, our general identity statement is, and that is bringing. Oh, Diana, you helped write it. You say what it is, and then I'll tell you what I think about it.
Okay. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ is a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. We welcome all to the Lord's table as God has welcomed us.
The reason that is such a hot button for me is because as a nurse, even in my very first program, my associate degree, the term holism is something that was really woven into our fabric as student nurses. My approach as a nurse has always been to care for the patient body, mind, and spirit in his family, in her community, in the world. And so when you have that approach and you get to be part of a church that has that as part of who they are, it has meant a great deal to me. And that's why the little newsletter that we put out every month, my article is entitled On Becoming Whole. And that's the focus. And as far as Bible, but integrating the Bible into this approach, people went to Jesus to get healed. You know, the big draw wasn't that he was a great teacher and a great philosopher. For a lot of people, it was they went to him to get healed. And I like to think that in some small way we can help with that, with what we do in health ministries and how we minister just to our congregation as a whole.
And I think it's important to think about the healing that oftentimes that you see in the scripture has a communal and a social aspect to it.
Yes.
There is a restoration to the community from isolation.
Yes.
And so it's not something that just that individual, it affects the whole community and it affects that person's participation in the community.
Yes.
And so as Christians, as welcoming as becoming whole, because we're not all whole,
And we never will be.
we're becoming it. And so I think that's beautiful. And so this is just one part of that step on that journey we're taking.
And I can't help but want to add on behalf of mental health, within as much as disabilities have been marginalized in life, even within the disability community, mental health has been the stepchild.
Yes.
And particularly in the church universal, we have moralized human behavior. We have described people not as depressed, but as lazy. We have talked about other explanations for why people behave and do the things they do, which tend to have a moral judgment about them that
Yes.
isn't always accurate.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's not terribly healing.
And it's really important to lift that up in the situation that our communities are in today with the addiction problems. We have to value and lift up the people in our community that have addictions, because that's as much of an illness as cancer or heart disease or breast cancer or anything else. And very often the discussion around addictions is very judgmental and hurtful.
I want to just segue into Diana's portion before we take another break, but we're going to spend a little bit of time talking with you about appearances and also your new program, Welcome Buddies, which we want to hear a lot about. Before we do that, I want to demonstrate that. I even at one point thought, I don't think I ever asked each of you to do this or instruct you. Do you ever sit there on Sunday morning and think about who is in the pews that may, who may have various deficits and disabilities and so forth? You wouldn't even know this. I've got such an invisible disability that people don't know. One of the first tasks, my emotion when I was a small child, the greatest thing that would defeat me was feeling overwhelmed. I was in tears when I was 5 years old and my mother was trying to teach me to tie my shoes. That seemed utterly ridiculous. Same thing with handwriting. Trying to make the capital D in my last name, I cried. I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. That sounds silly now. You do something that the whole congregation, I have been to Florence Christian Church, and you do something with the whole congregation on Sunday morning that just, I have to sit there. You do lead a prayer, and it involves doing it with hand gestures, and I'm unable to follow and do it. the only way I can do it is if somebody does it with me slowly, so that I can physically do it at the same time, and then it takes repetition.
But what we do to include our children and teach them about worship leadership is we say a special blessing before they go on to some worship experiences that are slightly more developmentally appropriate than our current worship services. And as I say, we say it both with our words and with our signs using American Sign Language. And so we invite everybody to make their L first, and you put it at your top of your shoulder, and it goes, and it's the Lord be with you as you worship, and also with you as you worship.
You're gonna get it, Mike.
You're gonna get it. And the thing about, from my understanding about American Sign Language, is that if you need to do it the opposite way, it's whichever your hand is dominant. So it's not even, so you can totally switch it too, if you want to.
Just quickly, don't feel bad about my challenges. I've had a ballroom dance teacher say, we will go very slow for Mike. So you're not alone. Thank you. We're back. This is what people with disabilities teach us, and we have the staff from Florence Christian Church, they're doing some innovative programs and ministries there, as well as embracing some ministries that the general community and population have been doing for a little bit. And we're excited for them with what they're doing. I want to turn next to Diana, who is the associate minister and wears many hats, but especially works with children and youth. And she's going to talk about a new program they're launching called Welcome Buddies. Diana?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So I think the first thing to say about Welcome Buddies is that it is not my program. In fact, I am not the expert at all. A lot of this was birthed about my own inability and my own lack of experience of working with some of our children and youth who have what you would say are disabilities. And I really didn't know. I really didn't know how to effectively minister to them, because I knew what we were doing was not effective for them or for their families or for the whole congregation. So Florence Christian Church is blessed. It's amazing how God provides with a wealth of knowledge and experience of working specifically with children with disabilities. We have several teachers, who are special ed teachers, who are 20, 30 years experience of working in the classrooms. As they joke, they have seen it all. They've seen the trends that go. We have people former nurses who worked with children with physical disabilities. We have family members whose own children have some type of disability. And so earlier this summer, I got this group together, and basically I said, we are a place of welcome. How can we be welcoming to children and youth with disabilities? And so we began to we're beginning to dream and to daydream and research and find out what other people are doing, because other churches are doing this and asking these questions and are further on the journey than we are, so we can learn from them. But we are calling it Welcome Buddies, and the first place we did was we addressed the space issue, because a lot of times that's an easier place to start. And so one of the things within our congregation, we have at least one youth and several others who needed some special space because of being on the autism spectrum. They needed a sensory room to be able to take those moments for quiet, for regrouping, to get whatever sensory input they needed that we didn't have space for in other parts of the congregation or in our physical building. So we converted a room that was in limited use to a sensory room. So this wonderful team came in one day, and I wasn't even there, and they converted it into a space that's welcoming to meet different sensory needs and that can be used for different things. And so there's like a really quiet corner, there's a place for people who might need a little more stimulation, there's weighted blankets, there's those for things in there for those who need the tactile input. They need quiet and silence, there's like a really dark corner they can go to. There's different levels of lighting that can be available.
I love the twinkly lights.
Yes, there's twinkly lights, or if you need bright lights, or types of things. And so that's this first thing that's available. The next step that we're thinking and looking and seeing what other people are doing is to provide parents a place of respite. On Sunday morning can be a time of respite where they know that their child that they don't have to be the primary responsibility for that child during a brief time. Not that they're not there, and not that they don't have some, but that they can turn some of that burden that they carry every week as being a caretaker over to somebody else who is trained and equipped.
I'm going to interrupt you on that note because, so much that's been done regarding people with disabilities involves the medical and the psychological. Now you're moving into the social.
Absolutely.
As I literally sit here in order to host this program today, someone is sitting with my mother who has stage 4 cancer. This would not be possible without the social aspect of life. And you're describing how this time, though you have a plethora and a wealth of people in the church with professional experience, it doesn't take professional experience.
Nope, it takes, and that's why it's called a welcome buddy, is somebody who, a buddy, that person can know that is their person who will help them and help the rest of the congregation as well relate to them in ways. That's actually one of the a very powerful piece from talking to some congregations who've launched similar programs, is that it helps having that translator person there. So for people for whom it might be a little discomforting or might not know what to say to a child on the autism spectrum who always stares down, or how to engage, that they have that behavior modeled for them. That person teaches the congregation and those members as well about how to engage and provide that social aspect. And then that translates into the rest of the community too, and the rest of the members' life. The Welcome Buddy they will be trained, but it'll be volunteer. They don't have to be experts. And the idea, at least to start, is that it'll be based on what that individual's needs, because as we've been talking, disabilities take a wide range. So for some, it might be somebody who sits through worship and maybe takes them to the sensory room. For some, they might need a little more intensive care. For some, it could be they just need another adult to help them participate fully in the children's programming that we already offer. For some, it may be we need to create an entirely different way for them to engage with God and to form in their faith. Because that's where my role comes in, is the question I am asking is, how can we as a church provide space and an environment for the children and youth who already have a relationship with God. That is the foundation of our children's ministry, is children already, all children have a relationship with God. And so our role as a church is to create an environment and ways for that child to be in relationship with God, whether that's through loving adults, whether that's through worship experiences, whether that's through getting cookies at the hospitality table on Sunday morning. That is the fundamental belief. And so as a pastor, I want to say, how can I help the parents and this community help you as a child of God, already having a relationship with God, continue to grow in that faith?
And the other thing that I love about this is not only is it meeting the child or youth where they are, it's also saying to those parents, you also are important and valued by the community of faith. Yes. We want you not to be stressed out when you come to church. We want you to know that it's a safe place for you and your family to be. And as we do that, we're accepting them where they
Yes.
are as well.
I want to quickly move into another
Sure.
area so we get time for everything before the hour is up. Going back to my own adolescent times and so forth, and trust me, I was once a teenager. I
believe it.
and I wore clothes that I hoped would impress my peers, and wore my hair how I hoped, and did all the things that we hoped would make me more accepted.
Did you have long hair?
Eventually. Eventually, and Pam had a fro and everything else, and
There you go.
because we went to high school together. But if you had some thoughts that you could contribute and share with us about how you might approach a child who is maybe in a wheelchair and saying, I don't have the mobility that others have, they're suffering from self-esteem. Can you help us? And if you can't, that's okay. But
I think one of the things that I truly believe is that goes back to so all children have a relationship with God, which means all children are gifted by God with things that they can do. And so, some of this exclusion things is not just children with disabilities, it's all children.
yeah, we're talking about obesity and all kinds
All
of
sorts of stuff. And
eating
so
disorders.
I truly believe that all children have ways that they can serve, that they can serve their community, and gifts that they can give. And that is, I think, one of the ways of trying to help them do that, is that they aren't, sometimes we say ministry. A friend, another Christian educator I know uses 3 things. It's ministry. Yes, it's ministry to, but it's ministry with, and it's ministry for, which is kind of the more advocating kind of thing. And so you do all 3 of those in any type of ministry. And I think that one of the things is to talk about how they're all children of God, and everybody is created in God's image. And what that means is that you are created in God's image, whatever your ability or disability, wherever your appearance is. The self-image we have with media, this is what the perfect person looks like, is not true. God's created us in a wide variety. And so if you can embrace that piece of the Imago Dei, and knowing that how God has created you is beautiful, and that includes your body, because that's how you know the world. That's how you experience the world, whatever your ability or disabilities are.
And just in our next section, we're going to talk about Disabled God, this book that has made such an impact in the community, in the religious community. We have projected such a triumphant and powerful God of perfection and beauty and all things good for so long, and God is, but what does that mean? We also speak of a God who has been crucified, and I understand that's a particularly Christian theological perspective, but it's from that vantage point that we are able to talk about God's brokenness, so that we can feel whole again. And Christ empties himself so that we can feel full. And pretty much people start paying attention to our message, and that's what captivates them, I think. That's my opinion. Back with what people with disabilities teach us. We're here with the staff, at least part of the staff from Florence Christian Church. We don't have any musicians here today, but we can always hum if we need to. We do have the senior minister, the associate minister, and Phyllis, I won't get it right. That's part of
The
that.
Health Ministries Coordinator.
Health Ministries Coordinator. This is part of the need to practice and repetition that I have.
Mhm.
But in our final section, we're going to deal a little bit theologically with some reality. We said this program is about making it more real, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and that was so God would be more real with us. And I contend that people with disabilities teach us more about reality, in particular because they aren't all deficit. People that have disabilities have strengths. We've learned that from some of the people who have been celebrities and famous people in history, from presidents. Currently, I have not had it verified, but Bill Gates, I've heard, has Asperger's, and Dan Aykroyd definitely, and the list goes on. It's extensive. I mean, some well-known painters and so forth and so on. So we need to remember that people with disabilities, in particular, this green component of this puzzle piece represents the strengths that we all have. And the pink, and I didn't come up with